Chapter 9. The Spiritual Cultivation of Man. At the very beginning, I must call the reader's attention to the fact that I'm using the concept of spiritual cultivation as an alternative to the concepts of religion and religious systems. This is made necessary by the common misconceptions that surround the two latter terms. Of these, one of the most important misconceptions is the belief that all groups of people have a religious consciousness, and the other is the belief that under the surface of the differences between religious systems that they are all essentially the same, or at least aspire to the same goal, or ultimately worship the same God. The falsehood of these beliefs will be proven as the material of this chapter and subsequent ones unfold. The key is provided when we consider the fact that we can evaluate all religions or people's claim of having it by their degree of spiritual growth. What is spiritual culture? Its chief methods and goal are defined by the essential nature of man, which we saw is the likeness of God. When man is born, his consciousness is confined to the three lower divisions of his spirit, the physical, animal, and concrete, intellectual, sahu divisions of the spirit. As these irrational and divisive faculties are the only guides to his consciousness and will, his behavior is subject to error. This is the cause of all that is wrong in the world. Spiritual culture, then, is a system that methodically leads man's consciousness to the higher parts of his being, wherein dwell those faculties that contain the essence of God's attributes. In short, its goal is to raise his consciousness and spiritual power. The acquirement of wisdom, the intuitive knowledge that frees man from errors, and the spiritual power to achieve his will-making criminal acts unnecessary is the result of achieving the goal of spiritual cultivation. We can already begin to see that not all religions share this understanding and this goal. For some, man is essentially a sinner, i.e., confined to his animal spirit and concrete intellect, and can therefore only be saved by the intervention of a savior outside of himself, or can only be kept from doing wrong by threats of a doomsday or eternal damnation that awaits the sinner. In the traditions of Canaan, its Kabbalistical teachings, and Black Dravidian India, man's salvation can only be achieved by the elevation of his consciousness to the higher part of his being and the increase of his spiritual power, that he may be free of the limitations of the physical world. Ignorance and impotence are the father and mother, respectively, of all evils in the world. The exact manner in which the spiritual cultivation of man is to be undertaken, the schedule and the method, is shown once more by the tree of life and the metaphorian, incorrectly called myth, of Asar, which incidentally is the oldest recorded initiation doctrine known to mankind. I have adapted the Greek term metaphorion to metaphorion to coin a new term to be used in place of the term myth. The distinction cannot be encapsulated by a mere definition. As you read through the following chapters, you will realize that these stories don't fit neatly into the category of allegories. Neither do they bear much similarity to the myths of Rome, Greece, the Middle East, etc. When they are related to the tree of life and to its related initiation and meditation systems, they will be seen to be poetically rendered spiritual scientific principles. According to the story, in the most ancient of times, a Khemetic king named Asar discovered the method of raising his consciousness to the highest division of his spirit and increasing his spiritual power to its highest potential. Spheres 0, 1, 2, and 3. As a result, he was able to bring civilization, a spiritually controlled way of life, to the people, with its accompanying social harmony, peace, and prosperity. The reader must recall what was said in previous chapters regarding the Ba, or Asar man. Order in the land was maintained by a system that effectively developed the moral faculties in people, and by allowing only such men and women who had developed their moral faculties, spheres 4, 5, and 6, to hold positions of government. It wasn't long before his youngest brother, Set, symbol of the dedication of our intellectual faculties, logical and artistic, to the service of the sensuous and emotional nature, became jealous of all the adulation and homage paid to Asar. Driven by his lust for power and the rebelliousness of the animal spirit against the order and laws imposed by Asar, Set, with the assistance of a confederacy of no-gooders, the Sebal from Sebek, deity of the eighth sphere, killed Asar. They then hacked his body into 14 pieces and scattered them all over the land. It is said that a shrine to a deity emerged at the place where a part of his body fell. Those with understanding will grasp what is implied regarding polytheism. With Asar out of the way, Set usurped the kingship and proceeded to terrorize the world. He created the first empire, rule of a foreign power over others, and replaced the system of maintaining social order through moral cultivation with a policing system. As symbolized by the fragmenting of the body of Asar into pieces, he separated religion from the state, education, separated God from nature, from man, separated spirit from physical matter, the divine from the mundane. In short, he instituted an insidious system of dividing and segregating all things and people from each other and the whole. In short, he alienated man from God, the world, and himself. Set's rule, of course, is that of all Sahu men, on the social level, and the rule of the faculties of the animal spirit and Sahu, spheres 7, 8, and 9, parts of the spirit in all men. Everyone, deities included, feared him. He was invincible in war and violence, which were his chief means of settling differences as well as the objects of his worship. No one opposed him. Many even basked in the material pleasures with which he bought them off, all except Asar's two youngest sisters, Aset and Nebet, ninth and seventh spheres respectively. They searched for and found the dismembered parts of Asar's body, reunited them, wrapped the body in white linen as a mummy, and buried his body at the bottom of the river. They set for his protection the great serpent Khemetic, or Kundalini. Some say that with the words of power given to her by Tahuti, others say that with Asar's choicest part, she immaculately conceived a son, Heru, to Asar, who as a legitimate heir to the throne could challenge Set, who had usurped it. And as in the Christian myth, which was copied from the Osirian Metaphorian thousands of years later, Set, hearing about the birth of a king who would challenge his reign and save the kingdom, sent his agents out to find and kill the child. But Aset was able to elude them and raise Heru to manhood. Grown into full manhood, he engaged Set in a series of battles that lasted for hundreds of years. Victory slipped in and out of the hands of each combatant, but this stalemate was a victory to Set, for as long as morality and spirituality did not rule the world, he was achieving his goal. Eventually, Heru learned of the existence of a deity that Set could not bother, who remained aloof of the events going on in the world. This deity, Tahuti, it was written, was the only one that could guide Heru to a sure victory over Set. Heru sought his guidance, and was thus able to defeat Set. It was not accomplished militarily, but in the court of law, where Set was tricked into accepting the very laws that he had devised to enslave others. Maintaining law and order, he called it. As one of Set's strong points was communication, Sebek, the eighth sphere, was his main component. His penalty was to serve as the wind that propels the boat of Asar, i.e., to disseminate the wisdom of Asar throughout the worlds. The kingdom of Neter, God, was now re-established with Heru as the king, but guided by Asar, whom he reawakened or resuscitated from time to time. This can only be understood by taking note of the fact that it describes the foundation of the African system of divine kingship. At prescribed times, rituals are performed by the African kings, Heru, and their royal priesthood to communicate with the spirits of the deceased kings, the Asars in order to receive their advice. This type of ritual is incorrectly called by Western scholars ancestor worship. It must be called ancestor communication rituals. The meaning of the Osirian metaphorian has different levels of application. The Osirian metaphorian in the spiritual evolution of the individual. 1. Asar established order, harmony, and prosperity. It is the Asar, Sphere 1, within us that unites and harmonizes all of the separate functions in our body, enabling them to work as one. It is this metaphysical nucleus, God manifested within us, that coordinates the development of the human being from the very moment following conception. At the center of all acts of creation, whether they are of a galaxy or of an atom, is the Supreme Being. All questions regarding abortion must consider this fact, and can only be resolved by a master of cosmogonical law. 2. Asar is killed by Set, who usurps the kingdom. Although our divine self, Asar, is present at all times of our life, it cannot make its presence felt because we are born with our consciousness focused in the lower part of our being, spheres 7 through 10. The domination of our lives by our emotions, sphere 10, Khemetic, the animal part of the spirit, and the Sebek faculty, 8th sphere, is symbolized by Set's usurpation of the kingdom of Asar. We dedicate our lives to the gratification of our emotions and desires. What we do, want, how we do it, etc., is dictated by our likes and dislikes. And since our passions and sensual desires are not guides to what is correct or beneficial, we create a great deal of trouble for ourselves and others. 3. Asar's body is cut into 14 pieces and spread over the land, giving rise to shrines. This corresponds to the loss of sense or unity, religion, that accompanies the suppression of our Asar faculty by the lower parts of the spirit. In past chapters, we saw how the domination of our consciousness by the 8th sphere, Sebek, results in our segregation of the whole into unrelated pieces. Doctors separate healing from nutrition. Scientists separate God from nature. Psychologists separate the spirit from the body, and so on. Later in this chapter, we will take a look at the integral system for the spiritual cultivation of man, which has been separated by many cultures, some Africans included, into standalone spiritual systems, shrines. The Sebek faculty also creates concepts that lack objective reality. X is a medicine. Y is a poison. There is a devil fighting for the soul of people, etc. 4. Aset and Nebt Het collect the pieces of his body and bury it at the bottom of a river and protect it with the serpent Khemetic. This section deals with the beginning of the process of reintegrating man's consciousness through the functions of mediumistic trance, Aset, and creative visualization, Nebt Het, Het Heru, one pointedly devotion, directed at reestablishing Asar as the dominant faculty in our lives. That Asar is buried at the bottom of a river symbolizes that he is accessible only through trance. His being guarded by the great serpent Khemetic, Kundalini, means that the type of trance that will awaken him has to be of the ecstatic modality. 5. Through the use of words of power, Aset immaculately conceives and gives birth to Heru, who is heir to the usurped throne of Asar. Heru, we learned, is the will of man. It is awakened by taking into ecstatic trance our devotion to re-establishing our divine self through the aid of the appropriate words of power, Hri, Heru, Hera, etc. It is an immaculate conception because it is a manifestation of our spirit that does not result in ourselves creating or reinforcing conditionings within our spirit. Normally, every goal in our life depends on our creation or reinforcement of a habit, conditioned state of the spirit. This is important from the standpoint that our ultimate goal is to liberate our spirit from the compulsion of all conditionings superimposed upon it. 6. Set sends his agents to look for and kill the boy king. This symbolizes the antagonistic reaction of our animal spirit and lower intellect toward our efforts to alter our behavior pattern to reflect the values of our higher divine nature. Most people are comfortable with spiritual culture as long as it does not entail giving up their likes and dislikes, following a teacher, living in harmony with cycles, interacting with things in a purposeful manner, etc. This stage cannot be understood unless we adhere to the definition previously given regarding the true purpose of man's will. Freedom of choice, the exercise of the will, is not the freedom to chart the course of our destiny, but our ability to embrace truth or the lower part of our being, opinions, emotions, to undertake actions that are in or out of harmony with the whole. So at this stage, when the will of man begins to make its presence felt, either as a result of spiritual instruction or the trance work of the previous stage, he often rebels against the higher values. There is a dichotomy between what he believes or understands and what he feels. 7. Grown into full manhood, Heru engages Set into battle, but cannot achieve any more than a stalemate, which ultimately is failure. This corresponds to the use of the will to fight the lower part of being, its inability to defeat it. It wins some battles and loses others. It's caused by the fact that the will is being guided by the very faculties it is trying to bring under its control. For example, you resist an emotion or desire because you are afraid of getting caught. There is a failure to understand that as long as you are motivated by an emotion, fear of getting caught, or being embarrassed, of dying, of going to jail, etc., you cannot successfully oppose undesirable emotions and desires because in each case you are being controlled by the emotional part of the spirit. 8. Heru is able to defeat Set with Tahuti's assistant. At this stage, the will is guided by the wisdom of Tahuti through meditation, counsel from sages and oracles, which, as we learned, is the will of God. 9. Set's penalty. As the core of Set's being is the 8th sphere, Sebek, which is our faculty of communication, Set's penalty is to disseminate the wisdom of Asar throughout the world. 10. The re-established kingdom of God. Here the individual realizes his divinity and becomes a sage. His words and teachings serve to guide others to the life of peace, love, and prosperity. The metaphorian of Asar in the spiritual evolution of society. 1. Asar established order, harmony, and prosperity. This is symbolical of the fact that the nations that established civilization were governed by religion and a higher moral code than exist in contemporary so-called modern societies. It is interesting to note that imperialism, the subjection of a foreign nation by another, did not occur until the coming of the Semites to Mesopotamia. It started with Sargon I of Akkad. Until then, the great powers of Kemet, Sumer, Kush, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and Elam lived in relative peace with one another. Skirmishes and quarrels over routes, etc. existed for sure, but never did they set out to plunder, destroy, or subjugate each other. Neither did they go up to the north to enslave or exploit the military weak Caucasian. 2. Asar is killed by Set, who usurps the kingdom. This corresponds to the period since the coming of the Eurasian to Western Asia, Mesopotamia, India, Africa, the Mediterranean, and later to the rest of the southern and western hemispheres. The conquerors reinterpret the religious teachings and cultural elements of the ancient civilizations in light of their level of understanding, biases, interest, etc. Motivation of human behavior is no longer through moral cultivation, but through fear and violence. Spiritual values are replaced by crass materialism, etc. We know the story well. 3. Asar's body is cut into 14 pieces and is sprayed over the land, giving rise to shrines. This speaks of the dispossession of the people from their land by the conquerors and their dispersion throughout the world. In a more significant manner, it refers to the breaking up of the integral spiritual initiation system into its components, and their being spread over the world as separate religious systems. We will see later that the great initiation systems of Kemet and Canaan were composed of 10 major stages and 23 minor, the so-called 33 degrees of masonry. Once these nations came under attack, signaling the beginning of the end, as their prophets had foretold, they began to send priests with their shrines into different parts of the world in order to preserve the teachings. 4. Osset and Nebuchadnezzar collect the pieces of his body and bury it at the bottom of a river and protect it with the serpent Khemetic. This corresponds to the masses' adherence to their religious faith, however unsophisticated, and their undying hope for a world of peace, happiness, and plenty. 5. Osset immaculately conceives and gives birth to Herul, who is heir to the usurped throne of Asar. The preceding stage eventually leads to the birth of revolutionaries. 6. Set sends his agents to look for and kill the boy king. This symbolizes the typical reaction of conquerors and oppressors to those who revolt against their immoral rule. 7. Grown into full manhood, Herul engages Set into battle but cannot achieve any more than a stalemate, which ultimately is failure. This is the stage of revolutions in the world, but it does not lead to success, as one dies by the sword if one lives by it. Might, however justified or unavoidable, does not make for right. We are presently at this stage in our social development. 8. Herul is able to defeat Set with Tahuti's assistance. At this stage, moral and legal values are wedded to serve as a basis for educating the international and social conflicts in the world. The blatancy of the hypocrisy of the conquerors will be a major factor in the resolution of these conflicts, as they will be shown to be in constant violation of the very laws that they propose for others. For this to take place, there must be a philosophical and moral restructuring of the United Nations. The oracles, Ifa, Metu Neter, I Ching, and Dalugun will play a major background role in the restructuring of the philosophical principles that will dominate in scholarly, religious, and governmental circles. 9. Set's penalty. The entire network of communications media will be used to establish and maintain a world order based on the principles embodied in the Tree of Life. 10. The re-established Kingdom of God. This is a way of life where all things are in unity with each other. Peace, harmony, and prosperity will prevail. But since we could prophesy into our future, it's because we are reading the past. So the summit of Asar will not last forever. Nothing on earth does. All is transitory and ephemeral here. Before long, Set will be back. Do not be oppressed. Keep your spirit like the sun at midday. Forever. End of chapter 9. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Metu Neter, Volume 1 by Ra'un Amar Nefer. Chapter 10, The Tree of Life Initiation System, an outline. While metaphoric stories like the Osirian system explained in the preceding chapter enables us to get an integral understanding of a complex process, they do not lend themselves to giving the details and precision that are necessary for carrying out the process. For this, we must go to the Tree of Life. Sphere 10, Geb, the Kabit, animal part of the spirit. This part of the spirit sets the foundation of the problem to be overcome. We are born with this part of our spirit already programmed for the preservation of our survival. Its basic program can be reduced to an attraction, likes, cravings, desire for what gives us pleasure, and a repulsion, displeasure, dislike for what causes aversion or pain. It is a very rudimentary mechanism that can assist us somewhat efficiently against physical dangers, but if not transcended, it becomes the greatest impediment to our spiritual development. Since we can become in love with things that are not good for us and hate that which is most beneficial, then this part of the spirit cannot be the guide for what is right or wrong. All that threatens to interfere with our pleasures or cause pain leads to a response of anger or fear, responses that are not capable of solving problems or conflicts. For this understanding is essential. Sphere 9, Auset, the foundation of the Sahu part of the spirit, due to its extreme receptivity, this part of the spirit is greatly affected by the Khemetic animal spirit. We are more inclined to imitate, learn those ideas that cater to the domination of the emotions and imitate the behaviors that portray receptivity and impotence in the face of our emotions and sensuous nature, crying because of pain, displeasure, anger, etc. Manifesting anger because of contradiction, differences, etc. If the adults in the society into which we are born have transcended the expression of this part of the spirit, then we would have just the opposite as examples to imitate. Sphere 8, Sebek. It is through this faculty that we become informed. We receive names for things and events, definitions, descriptions, and explanations. An unwise society will fail to teach its citizens the difference between knowing, experience of a reality, and believing acquired information. If people knew, for example, what is love when they said to another, I love you, they could not, for example, manifest anger to another person. For love, an expression of the fourth sphere, is a perpetual expression of joy and optimism that is totally independent of external circumstances. It is giving, not seeking in return. At the eighth sphere, we know the words but lack the experience behind the words, so our actions contradict our claims and beliefs. In addition, because the eighth sphere is also receptive to the 10th and is rooted in the ninth, we imitate the definitions given to us, etc. We are inclined to accept and incorporate into our belief bag of tricks those ideas that allow us to rationalize or justify the dominance of our animal spirit. We go as far as creating a set of complex myths to give power to the animal in us. It is at this point that evil comes into play. All non-Western traditions are in agreement that cleverness, deception, and cunning are the fundamental expressions of evil. By evil, or deception, etc., we mean the invention of names, slogans, concepts, etc., that allow us to gratify and cater to the animal spirit, regardless of the price to our well-being and that of others, and worse, when the slogans, etc., are used to exploit and oppress others by manipulating them through the lower part of their being. It is very easy to do in a society that is ignorant of the difference between knowing and believing, that is ignorant of the fact that the possession of information, names, definitions, explanations, and description is not the possession of knowledge of the reality symbolized by the information. For example, at this level, people receive information or taught a scripture regarding God, definition, description, etc. Because they now confuse the knowledge, experience of the scripture defining and describing God with the actual knowledge of God, they have no qualms about murdering others whom they accuse of paganism, heathenism, etc. Because the latter professes a different belief or experience of God. In this book, the reader will see all of the challenges that a person must meet before he can qualify himself to have actual knowledge of God. Then he can judge for himself. He can take a hint from the fact that this realization takes place at 0 above the tree of life. In short, the disintegrating effect of this part of the human spirit is what enables the person to separate his beliefs from his actions. He worries about his health, yet smokes and eats junk food. His animal spirit controls him, claims that he is concerned about the health of the public, and its economic well-being, yet he spends billions of dollars subsidizing tobacco growers, hospitalization for the cardiac and cancer victims of tobacco, and cancer research, etc. Deceptions like these, which number in the thousands on all levels, are caused by the failure of the individual and the society to transcend this expression of the eighth sphere. This is the one and true devil. We must remember that the Bible defines him as a deceiver. It is not an arch enemy of God that is lusting after our souls. It is the immature intellect in man in the service of the emotional and sensuous, the animal part of the spirit. Earlier we saw that it is called Set in the Khemetic tradition. This is the origin of the Christian Satan, even to its color, red. Sphere 7, Het Heru. Without knowing it, we integrate the building blocks of all that we accomplish through the use of our imagination. This is why we spend a great deal of time visualizing the things we aspire to in life. Unfortunately, what the spiritually uncultivated wants in life is once more again dictated by what causes pleasure. Sebek, the eighth sphere, by now has found artful ways, clever words of smoothing the way. He substitutes pleasure for happiness, pleasurable for spiritually uplifting, rebellion against spiritual law and spiritual teachers for the pursuit of liberty, etc. But the glitter of Het Heru's metal, which is copper, must not be confused with gold. These four influences, spheres 10 to 7, seal the way to the spiritual development of the individual. They ensure that his consciousness remains imprisoned in the lower part of the being, the Sahu and Khemetic divisions of the spirit. But now that we have a technical understanding of the problem, we can proceed to solve it. Underlying the problems to be overcome are two principles, which, with the four principles underlying the initiation process itself, yield 6 principles that must be kept in mind in order to properly understand the initiation. 2 principles underlying the problems to be overcome through initiation. 1. The identification of the individual with the person or the 4 lower faculties, spheres 7 through 10, instead of the self, 0 to sphere 3. This can be summarized by the following statement: I am the person. This is the source of all man's problems. The use of summarizing statements such as this one and others to follow will be fully appreciated when applied to meditation. 2. A struggle to overcome the lower part of being that ends in failure. As the individual is identifying with the person, then the person is fighting with the person. This corresponds to the intellectual struggle of Heru against Set. It can be summarized as, I deny my person to assert my person. The 4 principles underlying initiation. 1. Level 1 of initiation, which is carried out in 3 stages, spheres 9 to 7, corresponds to the return of the individual's identity away from the person to the self. Asar, spheres 1 and 0, and its faculties, spheres 3 and 2. In the Asar story, it corresponds to Aset's devotion to finding and reuniting the parts of Asar's body. It can be summarized as, I am Asar. 2. Level 2 of initiation, which is carried out in 3 stages, spheres 6 to 4, corresponds to the successful struggle of the individual in opposing the lower part of the being, the person. In the course of the meditation work given in this book, it will be shown that the efficacy of the will is not based on power, although the latter plays an auxiliary role, but on the spiritual liberation of the individual, which is ultimately dependent on his identification with the self, sphere 1. This level can be summarized as, I deny my person to assert myself. It corresponds to the success of Heru over Set, through following Asar communicating through Tehuti. 3. Level 3 of initiation, which is carried out in 3 stages, spheres 3 to 1, corresponds to the actualization of the ability to live as the self in the world. Once the individual has gained total freedom from the lower part of the being, the person. It can be summarized as, I live as Asar. This corresponds to Heru's assimilation of the qualities of Asar after defeating Set. 4. Level 4 of initiation, which is carried out in one stage. 0. The subjective realm, corresponds to the direct experience of the essential formlessness of one's being. Until then, all that we had to go on was the intellectual argument to the effect that, in order for us to transcend a particular habit or conditioning, our spirits must be essentially unformed. Here we come face to face with the reality. The importance of the above outline cannot be overemphasized. I so often come across individuals claiming to be undergoing initiation, yet they are totally unaware of the fact that the source of their problems is their identification with their persons, the habitual complex of ideation and emotional responses to everyday life situations. This is so deeply ingrained that they vehemently resist all attempts to pry them away from this lower complex. The 4 levels of initiation then is a process of 1. Preparing the individual for the struggle against the lower part of being, level 1. 2. The struggle itself. 3. The coming forth of the self and its faculties, level 3 and 4. The realization of the essential nature of the self as the unconditioned, unformed, eternal, and infinite capacity of actualization, level 4. Let us now proceed to detailing the 10 stages composing the 4 levels of initiation. End of chapter 10. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. The Metu Neter, Volume 1, by Ra'un Amen Nefer. Chapter 11. The 10 stages of initiation. Preliminary requirements to initiation. Sphere 10. Geb, the Khemetic. Essentially, spiritual development is a process of raising consciousness from the lower divisions of the spirit, the Khemetic, Sphere 10, and Sahu spheres 7, 8, and 9, through the higher ones, spheres 6 to 1, to its original place, 0, in the subjective realm. Once the individual has experienced the essential unconditionedness of his being, then he can live in the world in total freedom from all objective conditioned reality, not just simply the lower part of being. In addition, the spiritual power that is required to effect the raising of consciousness can also be directed by the will of the individual to affect his physical body, the life of others, and the external environment. How the ascent of consciousness is achieved can be made clear by a common analogy. Imagine a room with a furnace and a thermometer. By increasing the heat output of the furnace, the mercury is made to rise in the thermometer. Let us now equate 1. The mercury with consciousness. 2. The heat with a specific expression of our life force, Ra or spiritual power, and the measurements of the thermometer with the spheres of the tree of life and divisions of the spirit. Besides affecting the mercury, the heat will affect other things in the room. The kindling of the heat corresponds to the metaphysical effects of sex, and its increase to the effects of the austerities imposed on the initiate from the 4th to the 9th stage of initiation. The care of the life force. The heart of the work to be done at the 10th sphere concerns itself with the replenishment, conservation, free flow, and equilibrium of the modalities of the life force. This life force is known as Qi in the Chinese tradition, Ki in the Japanese, Kundalini in Dravidian India, Ra in the Khemetic, etc. Its replenishment is optimized by observing proper dietary principles, by following a very nutritious and wholesome diet. It is conserved by exercising moderation in eating, drinking, sexual activity, work, emoting, sensual gratification of all kinds, etc. Its free flow throughout the body is secured by judicious and periodic fasting, the practice of cleansing breathing techniques, nadi shuddhi, pranayama, etc., and a lifestyle that is free of emotional suppression. This life force has 4 modes of expressions that can be described through the metaphors of the 4 elements that we discussed in earlier chapters. It is subject to a cyclical alternation of phases in which it heats and dries the body at one extreme and cools and moisturizes the body on the other. In between these are phases of cold and dry, following the hot and dry, and hot and moist, following the cold and moist. These four phases are, metaphorically, fire, water, earth, and air, respectively. Over or under generation of any of these modalities result not only in illness, but in problems in the generation of the special expression of our spiritual power that is needed to raise our consciousness and to manifest our psychic powers. The equilibrium of these four modalities of our life force is achieved by a well-balanced diet, not according to the Western concept of food components, but according to their effect on or analogy to the four modalities of the life force, i.e., foods are also classified as fiery, hot peppers, garlic, etc., watery, watermelons, lettuce, wheat, etc. The Dravidians of India have left extensive treatises on this aspect of food classification and utilization in their work entitled the Ayurvedas, which the Aryan Vedantic Hindus are now claiming to be their work. As everything that we do depends on and affects one of these modalities of the life force, we must also observe moderation in our activities, as well as the time for which certain activities are in harmony with the cyclical manifestation of these forces. We will take a look at these later on. These are considered outer teachings, and their imparting are not considered part of the initiation itself. In fact, the teacher takes advantage of this stage to determine the level of receptivity and discipline of the student, for most people, unfortunately, do not make good candidates for initiation. Level 1, Stage 1 of initiation, Sahu division of the spirit, Sphere 9, Auset. It is here that the most important step in our spiritual development is taken. Can you imagine setting out on a journey without a destination in mind? Writing a novel without a theme to give unity to the multiplicity of scenarios and actions? An educational system without a curriculum? Yet this is the manner in which all men live without a true system of initiation. It is the effect of taking the person as one's identity. This step is the identification with Asar, Sphere 1, as ourself. We will see how this identification becomes the basis of the work that is to be done in each stage or sphere of initiation. This identification of ourselves with Asar, which has been equated with the projection of the Supreme Being as the core of our being, does not take place as an act of faith. Let's begin with the fact that the immense complexity, yet order and unity of the functions of man's body and spirit can only be attributed to a guiding intelligence. While most Western scientists are mute on the point, others of a more progressive mentality allege that this intelligence is the so-called subconscious mind. A study of the history of psychology will reveal that no one has ever proven the existence of such a mind. It was merely a concept invented by Western scientists in their atheistic attempt to speak of spiritual processes without seeming to do so. When the true nature of the spirit is understood from the study of spiritual literature and verifications through rituals and meditation, it will be seen that the spirit is not the integrator or director of its own functions. This is evidenced by the fact that the functions of the spirit, hence the body, can be altered at will through meditation. In its capacity of directing and integrating the operations of the spirit, mental, emotional, and physical functions, and the body, this intelligence dwelling within our being shows that it has, qualitatively, the same capabilities as the Supreme Being. Although smaller in magnitude, the making and running of man's spiritual body encompass the same degree of intelligence. In fact, this intelligence is an unseparated share or apportionment of the Supreme Being dwelling within man as herself. That is why it knows how to direct the spirit in its functions of transforming a fertilized egg into the billions of cells of many different types that we call the human being. That is why it knows how to direct the body in its functions of digesting and assimilating food, and its functions of healing the body, etc. It stretches intelligence to the breaking point to believe Westerners' claim to scholarship or science regarding their belief that these infinitely complex physiological functions are guided and kept in harmony by the blind mechanical functions of atoms, biofeedback mechanisms, etc. This indwelling intelligence is none other than our self-Asar, the first sphere of the tree of life, the apportionment of the supreme being within our being. It is the concrete validation of man having been made in the likeness of God. It is the Word that came to dwell in flesh. It is the concrete validation for the claim that the kingdom of God is within. It is with this indwelling divine intelligence that we must identify as ourself. Unlike with Christianity, this is not an act of faith. It is a concrete reality that is amenable to being experienced. And not only must it be experienced, we shall see that in the same way that it plays an active role in directing and unifying our mental and bodily functions, it will play a similar role in our initiation and all aspects of our lives. Imagine having this indwelling intelligence that knows how to run the machinery of your body, running your career, your education, your marriage, your nation, and so on. At this moment, it is limited to running the involuntary and subconscious functions of your being. Through initiation, ritual, and meditation, you will learn to expand its functions to the external part of your being, as well as to gain voluntary control over the involuntary processes. The fact that it dwells within you and can be experienced through mediumistic or slumbering trance is symbolized in the Asa story by its being buried within an acacia tree, or physical body, or at the bottom of a river, or innermost recesses of the spirit. Going into a mediumistic trance, which is symbolized as being submerged underwater, is the first spiritual skill that the initiate must acquire. Besides enabling the initiate to experience that itself is this indwelling intelligence, this form of trance serves a number of other functions at this stage of initiation. It is the key to memory and unification of experiences. People who have the so-called photographic memory are able to spontaneously go into a mild trance while reading, etc. This is the key to the mindfulness that plays a major role in the initiate's quest. Anyone who has made resolutions to change some aspect of his life has discovered that the main reason for failure is primarily due to forgetting. It is at the 15th ounce of that pound of chocolate cake that you remember your dietary resolution. Since the identification with Asar must underlie the initiate's thoughts and actions throughout his life, i.e. serve as the theme of the initiation in life, it must be firmly impressed through mediumistic trance upon the spirit. The perseverance in maintaining one's identification with Asar is symbolized in the Assyrian story as Aset's devotion to him. We also learn in the metaphoresis of Asar that she, along with Nebuchadnezzar, recollects all the parts of his body which Set had broken into 14 pieces and reconstructed, or remembered it. The breaking up of Asar's body is symbolical of the segregative nature of the eighth sphere, Sebek, dominated mentality of people before initiation, Sahu men. This process of remembering symbolizes the dynamizing effect that trance has upon our thinking. It helps to link up and bring to our awareness the host of associated ideas that have stood separated in our memory bank. This process exposes contradictions within our being and creates new revelations. Incidentally, this slumbering, mediumistic, or hypnotic trance is a major significance of the lunar correspondence to this sphere and to Aset, as it is most pronounced at the full moon and analogous times, winter, midnight, etc. As we saw in an earlier chapter, the word of power that corresponds to Asar is Ong, and to Aset, Dung and Vang. It is by working with these mantras that the initiate is able to accelerate and guarantee success in the work of this stage. There is another very important event that is initiated as a result of the work that is undertaken in this stage of initiation, but we will discuss it in Stage 4. Level 1, Stage 2 of initiation. Sahu division of the spirit, Sphere 8, Sebek. At this stage, the teacher provides the initiate with a new set of definitions, description, and explanations for what is life, what are emotions, etc. In short, the teacher redefines the basic ideas operating in the life of the student. Before this, all of the individual's beliefs are based on the identification with the person. We have already seen that up to this point, the individual has been victimized by the host of illusions, segregative thinking, and rationalizations of emotions due to the operation of the lower faculties making up the person. Now his beliefs must be redefined using the Osirian self-identity as their basis. The reshaping of one's belief system in light of the identification with the indwelling intelligence that is at the center of all our mental and bodily processes is called the opening of the way. It is important to understand that in reality we don't learn how to grow spiritually. We learn how to remove the impediments to the coming to the foreground of our submerged divine self, i.e., wrong ideas close the door to the full operation of the self in the life of the individual. One cannot overstate the fact that the indwelling intelligence was not intended to be limiting to operating your background mental process or involuntary bodily function. And as it is omniscient, it cannot be taught. The reformed Sebekian faculty, reflecting rationalizations based on one's true self, Asar, is called Aoat, the opener of the way. The way is a symbol for our beliefs and ideas as conduits of the course of our lives. As we believe, so we act. As we act, so goes our destiny. According to our unreformed Sebekian faculty, we are in the habit of rationalizing our actions according to our identification with our person. We would, for example, firmly believe that we could not help doing so, and so because of the way we felt, emotional influence, or didn't feel, etc. Can you imagine the indwelling self running the body according to whims and feelings? Surely its functions must be based on divine law and order. Mat, the fourth sphere. This process of redefining the belief system of the student is made very difficult by the use of our everyday language. Most African societies of initiates possess secret languages for such purposes. One of the reasons for this is that such languages create order in the thinking of the person through their semantical structures. We get glimpses of this in some of the South African languages in which the categorical word for God, Muntu, is the same for man. As a result of using such languages for our thinking, we are able, without conscious effort, a very important principle, to keep in our awareness the facts of our true nature. If your language constantly reminds you that yourself shares the same qualities as God by using the same term for both, if it reminds you of the difference between being informed and knowing by using clearly distinct terms for each, it facilitates the process of spiritual development. If we use our everyday language, we have to rely on personal descriptions of the terms that we use. I have found it necessary in this book to establish such special usages of terms like person for the lower part of being, spheres 7 through 10, and self for the higher part of being, spheres 0 to 3, and so on. Another benefit of such languages is to be found in their close relationship to the language of words of power. These languages use many devices, some of which are known as gematria, notericon, tamura, etc., in order to hide the words of power in the body of other words and to serve as a mnemonic device to the initiate. Take, for example, the name of the deity of wisdom, Tahuti. It conceals the mantra Hu. The Khemetic cosmology states that the god of the senses is Hu. Now, it is well known that the highest goals of meditation cannot be achieved unless thinking is stilled. So this hikal, word of power, is used to quiet the senses as their operation stimulates thought activity. This fact will constantly remind the initiate that wisdom is achieved by stilling the thinking process to enable our omniscience to come to the foreground. Similarly, the Khemetic phase for I am is Anuk, which is a transposition of the hikal Ankh. Each and every time that the Khemetic initiate says I am, he is being reminded that this I am is the same qualitatively as the Supreme Being. Although the classical Latin and Greek that are used for saying Mass lack the same degree of cogency and have no relation to words of power, it is on the basis of these principles that the Catholic Church has reserved them for their Masses and litanies. In the same manner that mediumistic or hypnotic trance was used in the preceding stage to re-establish the proper self-identity, so must it be used to establish these new definitions as operatives in the spirit or mind of the individual. Comprehending them is not enough. This is why people find themselves doing things that they are convinced they should not do. It is why the mere reading of scriptures and hearing of sermons is not enough to do much to alter people's behavior. The inculcation of this new set of values into the spirit serves additional functions. Ideas and beliefs only have power to influence our lives when they have been charged with emotional force. Expertise in meditation will reveal that emotions are primarily states of mediumistic trance. In this state, independent thinking and the will are to a large degree paralyzed, and consciousness is withdrawn from the external plane. The idea or image in the sphere of awareness becomes the reality of the moment. That is why people who in reality know better cannot at the moment of a powerful emotion rescue themselves. Why do some people lose control at the sight of a picture of a serpent, spider, etc.? Why do people lose their common sense during emotional moments? How about the profusion of wise thoughts that visit you only when you are dealing with other people's problems? The mediumistic trance, of which emotions represent a variety, is akin to the state of dreaming and death. And the guide of our behavior at such times is the idea or belief associated with the emotional complex. For example, what we call anger is a negative mediumistic trance in which the guiding factor is the image of our person carrying out some antisocial act, perhaps the idea that we are angry, etc. These negative thought energy complexes are symbolized as Set and Apep in the Commission tradition. The positive thoughts, rationalizations of our actions based on our identity with Asar, are symbolized by the deity Anpu, or Anubis, the guide of the dead, i.e., it corresponds to the positive thoughts that must guide us when we are in the grips of an emotion. Since the will and independent thinking will be by degrees paralyzed according to the strength of the emotion, our only guide at such moments are the thoughts reprogrammed into our behavioral patterns. Once the work of this stage of initiation is completed, which takes place at the 8th stage, Sphere 2, Tehuti, the initiate will be impervious to the visitation of any emotion, craving, or temptation. This is why it is said that Anpu, or Anubis, is the embalmer of Asar, i.e., he renders him incorruptible. During the 4th stage of initiation, we will see how this process truly unfolds. Level 1, Stage 3 of initiation, Sahu division of the spirit, Sphere 7, Het Heru. Once the initiate's belief system has been brought into harmony with truth, he is then ready for the intensification of the life force or spiritual power in order to raise the consciousness to the higher parts of the spirit. This power, which is called Kundalini by the blacks of India, Ra by the Comitians, Shekinah by the Canaanites, Eros by the Greeks, though misunderstood, libido by the psychoanalysts, though misunderstood, is none other than our life force. The arousal of Ra, our life force, to the point of manifesting psychic phenomena, prophecy, clairvoyance, psychic healing, etc., and raising consciousness to the higher parts of the spirit can take place when we are experiencing intense pleasure, extreme joy, heightened sexual excitement, orgasm, ecstatic trance, etc. It is of great importance to note that of all the intense pleasures that man can experience, only two, orgasm and ecstatic trance, can be deliberately induced. This explains the fundamental nature of black religious practices, as well as shamanism, which are centered around ecstatic trance. It also explains the sex-based ritual systems, tantra, etc., that are widely disseminated throughout the so-called pagan religions of the world. It also explains the heavy use of music and festivities, all Het Heru Venusian correspondences in religious ceremonies and meditation. The reader must recall that this stage of initiation belongs to Het Heru, the Venusian deity, goddess of art, festivities, joy, etc. of Kemet. While in the first stage of initiation, the initiate's trance is dedicated to establishing devotion, to realizing Asar as the embodiment of his self. And in the second stage, his trance is dedicated to impregnating into the spirit a belief system that is in harmony with truth. In this stage, the trance is dedicated to manifesting an intense joy for those earthly goals that are in harmony with the new belief system implanted during the second stage. A clue to the function of emotions is provided by its etymological structure, i.e., out, external, plus motion, the power to move, etc. It is the energy, or moving principle, or work-capable factor that has the power to overcome the resistance of physical, external matter. A law of nature is that all activities require energy. There is no achievement of the will without energy, and no extraordinary achievement of the will without an intensification of the power of the nervous system, or without intense emotional pleasure. There is a very important story in one of the chief scriptures, the Rudrayamala, based on the religion of the blacks of India. It tells of how the great yogi Vashista, who was very skilled in the orthodox teachings of yoga, who after 6,000 to 10,000 years, about 70 to 125 incarnations of yogic exercises, fasting, and asceticism, had been unable to bring forth his spiritual power, or kundalini, into full manifestation. He was about to give up and curse the goddess, declaring that it was all a hoax, when Tara, the goddess of the mantra Aum, appeared to him and told him that he could not manifest the mother in her full glory because he was practicing in the wrong manner. He should go to Mahasina and learn the correct method. When he got there, he found the god Vishnu intoxicated and in ecstatic embrace with a beautiful maiden. Forgetting that it was the deity himself that he was speaking to, Vashista criticized Vishnu for engaging in practices that went against the quote-unquote sacred teachings. Vishnu challenged Vashista to prove how and why sex was not sacred. After Vashista was not able to prove his point, Vishnu explained to him that during the sexual act, he and his yogini were involved in intense visualization aimed at preserving the world from extinction, while the sexual energy provided the motive force to achieve the goal of the visualization. He then initiated Vashista into the great Kula Yoga ritual of the blacks of India, thus enabling him to achieve his goal and bringing forth the goddess, fully effulgent as 10,000 suns. This is the basis of the tantric yoga system of the blacks who gave India and the world the yogic teachings. In his book, Reflections on the Tantras, Sudhakar Chattopadhyaya, page 13 states, "Then the sadhaka, or initiate, should worship the goddess in her, the female partner, private parts, according to this prescribed manner. The worshipper should then resort to pranayama, breathing practices, and remain ever calm in mind, thinking that the mother goddess is there. Although all teachers of yoga in the West have remained silent on the subject, All such procedures, as pressing the heels against the pubic area and the perineum during pranayama, breathing practices, and the bandhas, are primarily measures to help suppress ejaculation. All pranayamas that have as their objective the raising of the kundalini must be practiced during the sexual ritual. Most of what appears as separate practices of yoga, mudras, bandhas, pranayamas, asanas, are in reality segregated parts of an integral system. The Aryan ignorance and contempt for certain aspects of yoga, a black creation, was the cause of their acts of selection and rejection of parts from the system that were in harmony with their thinking. Imagine having functional parts of a television set, but the parts are not hooked up together. This is the state of the world practice of yoga. While engaging in sexual intercourse, the couple concentrates on visualizing a goal, success in the career of the husband or the wife, or both, for example. Before and during the ceremony, judicious use will be made of certain foods and drinks with aphrodisiac properties in order to realize the greatest ecstasy possible. The association of the image of the objective with the sexual ecstasy serves to keep the image constantly in one's awareness and endow it with great power to the individual in an occult manner. The resources to achieve the goal. Do not pleasurable experiences keep reflecting themselves in our awareness, motivating us to renew the experience? This is the great secret for maintaining oneself motivated, which is a major key to success in any undertaking. It is this principle that advertising experts are using when they advertise a car with a beautiful half-clad woman or pictures of political candidates with the word sex embedded in such a manner that it is not visible to normal vision. We, quote-unquote, pagans would rather meditate on transcending our lower nature and manifest our divinity during sex than dwell on the physical sensation of the act, let alone use it to sell candidates, crackers, and cars. Is not the latter truly prostitution of the spirit? An experience that is so alien to Westerners is the breaking out of a person having sex, most often the woman, into trance possession by a deity or an ancestor. Instead of the usual, I love you, how sweet you are, etc., the person now possessed with the deity engages in psychic healing, prophecy, moral admonitions, counseling, warnings, giving guidance relating to the meditation goal or some heavy theological abstractions. If they only knew who, in reality, is the pagan. Once this part of the spirit has been developed through repetitions of this Kula Yoga ritual, the initiate finds himself spontaneously and readily manifesting ecstasy regarding revelations that occur to him throughout the normal course of living. This development accentuates the importance of the two preceding initiation stages. Had his belief system not changed in the preceding stage, he would find himself being ecstatic about wrong ideas. And if he had not placed himself humbly under his teacher's guidance in the first stage of initiation, he would not have been receptive to the reformulation of his belief system in stage 2. The result would be that once he learned how to empower his imagination through ritual sex and other means of arousing the life force, he will find himself giving power to all kinds of false beliefs. The outcome is predictable. Our spiritual power is defined in the Khemetic and Black Indian traditions as an expression of the solar force, Ra and Kundalini respectively. And like the solar force, it nurtures all that is within us. It does not discriminate between harmful and beneficial beliefs. That is the chief danger that Kundalini yogis warn students in relationship to the arousal of Kundalini. One is going nowhere spiritually without arousing Ra, and one is courting all kinds of problems, persistent obsession with false ideas, if one attempts to arouse it without a teacher. We must take note of the fact that the ritualistic use of sex is not the only means of arousing one's spiritual power. It can be done with the mere repetition of words of power through the use of drugs, anamita, peyote, marijuana, called bhang in India, where it is used extensively for this purpose. And though the employment of hatha yogic sexual self-stimulation, this is asvini mudra, in which the perineum is contracted and relaxed throughout the visualization, coordinated with breathing. This is the muscle that we contract when we want to stop our urine in midstream. It also undergoes automatic contractions during sexual excitement and orgasm. Achievement of the goal by meditating with words of power by themselves requires so much time and so many meditations that it is not practical for the majority of people. Yet, when such methods are combined with Kula Yoga, success is attained in a short time. As for the use of drugs to aid in the achievement of ecstatic trance, the price of damage to one's health and social status makes this a poor option. Not only does the sexual ritual approach lead to a speedier success, it also helps to emancipate the practitioners from the physical side of sex, as their attention never dwells on the sexual act itself. For example, the Kamakaya Tantra instructs that the practitioner must not allow himself to lose his semen. Throughout the ritual, which usually lasts for 72 hours, in which the participants must remain in sexual embrace, they must concentrate on chanting the words of power and perform the dhyana, or visualization of the meditation objective. Furthermore, the woman must be seen as the embodiment of the female aspect of God and the man as the masculine. Students of Hinduism, the Aryan-based mixture of Indo-European religion with that of the blacks of India, might protest, claiming that the extinction of desires and emotions, asceticism, is the true means of achieving spiritual liberation. But this is pure spiritual, philosophical, and scientific ignorance. Our emotions are none other than the expression of the activity of our spiritual energy. Not only is it impossible to extinguish it, but its suppression results in a diminution of our libido and overall ability to meet the demands of the world. Physicians are very well aware of the detrimental effects that suppression of pleasure has upon the endocrine organs, especially the gonads. In fact, the gonads are the organs represented by Het Heru. Her name literally means house or Het of Heru, the libido, erotic force, sexual vitality that supports the will. The proper care of the gonads, prostate in the man, ovaries in the woman, and the judicious cultivation of pleasure builds up our libido, the power behind our will, ambition, psychic power, etc. Unlike the Aryan religions, which in typical Sebekian fashion segregate pleasure from the divine, Black religions have always understood that spiritual liberation depends on assigning the proper place to each thing in the world. The quest for pleasure must not lead us. Pleasurable acts are to be allowed only after they have been investigated and found to be in conformity with truth, and always in due measure. Can you imagine the effect on a people's consciousness and spirituality if every time they engaged in sex, their attention was directed toward the achievement of a spiritual goal? What if they thought of themselves as engaging not in a mere carnal act, but as divine beings using the energies of the lower part of their spirit to bring forth the higher? Do you know now why there are so many neuroses and sexual perversions in Western societies? We are not dealing here with quote-unquote schools of thought. Our sexual energy, which is the driving force for all of our accomplishments, spiritual and mundane, is an expression of the universal creative power of nature and of God. Misunderstood, misuse, suppress it if you want, but you will have no say when it avenges itself on you. Another important skill that is developed in this stage is that creative use of the imagination. We have already described its function as the coordinator of the shaping forces of the events in our lives. When we take a belief into a state of trance and elaborate upon it in our imagination, Unknown to us, we are manipulating and coordinating the forces that are responsible for shaping the event. This takes place regardless of whether the goal is harmful, undesirable, or beneficial to us. The imagination will organize the powers of the spirit to make the goal a reality. This is one of the reasons for the work during the preceding stage. If the initiate increases the creative power of his imaginative faculty without first realigning his belief system with truth based on the self as Asar, his wayward beliefs will direct his imagination to all sorts of harmful ends. Take, for instance, the persons who believe that, quote, falling in love process is beyond their control. That is one of those myths created by Set. These people, who are the ones who are vulnerable to infidelity while married, are not aware that it is their self-image identified with the person that is the cause of their quote-unquote falling in love. If a thing like this, and there are so many other manifestations, can happen with the normal amount of spiritual power, imagine what would happen to individuals with a great deal of spiritual power but wrong beliefs. Success in this initiation stage gives the initiate the ability to achieve all minor undertakings, many of which are not so minor, primarily through the use of his ecstatic trance and powered imagination. This is why Venus, the planetary correspondence to Het Heru, is called the Fortuna Minor. The worst thing that the initiate can do is to stop at this point in his work. He will eventually discover that as he arouses his raw force to greater activity, that it will begin to reawaken the erroneous beliefs and harmful desires that were set aside in the Sebek initiation. Unless he moves on to the next level, he will discover that Het Heru's external beauty conceals a most foul internal corruption. The third stage of initiation marks the completion of the preparation of the initiate for higher initiation. We must note that thus far the initiate has not been directed to confront his lower nature. In fact, the method around it was one of persuasion. The initiate entered into a mediumistic trance, which has the significant property of silencing thoughts and energies of resistance to change, and was then presented with a new belief system, calculated to replace the false dichotomies and wayward beliefs in his spirit. But this replacement is only temporary, for no spiritual growth has yet taken place. The key to understanding why the lower nature has not been challenged resides in the fact that these three faculties involved, spheres 9, 8, and 7, are feminine, i.e., receptive to the animal spirit. Their planetary symbols are the moon, cold and moist, Mercury, cold and dry, and Venus, cold and moist. The cold yin quality that they share symbolizes that the heat, sexual passion of the life force is not yet strong enough. The next triad of planets that correspond to the spheres wherein the next set of initiations will take place are all hot. Heru, sixth sphere, the sun, hot and dry. Heru Kuti, fifth sphere. Mars, hot and dry. Mat, fourth sphere. Jupiter, hot and moist. This heat makes them masculine, unreceptive to the animal spirit. For consciousness to function through them, the libido must be raised. The key to understanding why spiritual growth has not taken place, even if there has been a successful replacement of negative behavior, is due to the fact that the initiate has not yet become awakened. We must again take note of the coldness of the three faculties involved. It is no mere metaphor, for as we know, the body, animal spirit, cools down to allow us to sleep, and heats up to allow us to awaken. Changes in our behavior can only be credited towards spiritual growth if we do the work ourselves. So far, it was done for us by the initiator, while we were in a state of mediumistic or receptive hypnotic trance. Level 2, Stage 4 of initiation. Ab division of the spirit. Sphere 6, Heru. The initiation at this stage aims at teaching the initiate to establish his will as the master of his behavior. It is amazing that so much ink has flowed in regards to the will, yet so little is known about it. Willing is an action of the self and not of the person. When we will, we are involved in the action of settling into motion functions of the spirit or the body from the level of the self. Actions that are set into motion from the level of the person are acts of desiring, wishing, hoping, etc. The fundamental difference is that the will originates from the self, which is unswayed by emotions and sensuousness, while desiring is influenced and dictated by them. This is cleverly embedded in the Osirian story. Auset mates with the deceased Osir and conceives Heru. Het Heru carries him in her womb and gives birth to him. It is a grand metaphor for the union through trance of one's identity with the indwelling self. Auset mates with Osir, and the empowerment of this identity through the spiritual power intensification rituals in stage 3. Het Heru, which gives birth to the personal will, Heru. It is important to keep in mind that the goal of initiation is to attain to the point where one is able to set the so-called subconscious, the spirit, or involuntary functions into motion at will. Not only does the indwelling intelligence control the involuntary functions of the body, it also controls all phases of our behavior and is the major shaping force of everything that happens in our lives, i.e., it influences the course of our career, marriage, safety, and so on to our destiny. As the chief director of the spirit, subconscious, Asar is free of emotional influences. So must be the will, which it gives rise to. This is to say that the will is the child of the self, as desire is born of the person. The initiate also learns that the freedom of his personal will is not for the purpose of choosing and determining the various undertakings in his life, careers, marriage, etc. Such a concept must be alarming to Westerners, whites and blacks. But Africans have a long-standing tradition of consulting oracles in such matters to discover if the want is in harmony with the divine will, and if it is, which part of the spirit, as symbolized by a deity, is in control of the undertaking. This subject raises the question regarding predestination in people's lives. As this is a false concept, we need not entertain it. The practice of consulting an oracle to see if the proposed undertaking is in harmony with the divine will is based on the fact that, like all intelligent undertakings, all lives are planned. Do you plan before you undertake something important? Do you believe that your life is a haphazard, hence accidental sequence of events? Where there is no planning, there is no intelligence. The plan of each person's life is revealed by the second division of their spirit. This plan and parts of it can be made known through such oracles as Ifa, Afa, Dilogun, I Ching, the Metu Neter, the oracle revealed in this book, by initiates who have awakened their second sphere, Tehuti faculty, and in some cases by mediums. What then is the function of the personal will? The function of man's will is to allow him the freedom to choose between good and evil. What is good and what is evil? We go to the tree of life for our answer. The first and highest manifestation of divinity, Sphere 1, is the unity of all opposites, which is the good. The lowest manifestation, the 10th sphere, is the source of our emotional behavior, which makes our life irrational if we allowed it control over our lives. This is the evil. Heru's job, the will, is to keep the lower part of being, emotions, and the Sahu from directing our lives in deference to the higher. Beyond the importance of ensuring that all of our undertakings are in harmony with each other, the use of oracles involves a set of one of the most important rituals in our lives. In many cases, we find that the direction of the oracle is at odds with our desires and conditioning. Complying with the auricular pronouncement in most such cases involves the individual in a pitched battle against the lower part of being. This is the manner in which the deities, metaphysical intelligences, reveal to us which conditionings are to be overcome in relation to a specific undertaking, i.e., we are informed of the spiritual significance of a specific worldly undertaking. A person might be told by the oracle that in order to succeed in the marriage, rituals must be done to Sebek. It means that this person's marriage is a vehicle for the development of this spiritual faculty. A set of key oracular readings serves to map out a fully personalized spiritual curriculum for the individual, while the success in carrying out the directions provides an objective way of measuring the degree of spiritual development. Anyone who has tried to measure objectively and accurately his or her spiritual progress will be able to appreciate this fully. The ecstatic trance rituals performed in the preceding stage and certain breathing techniques introduced in this stage result in the awakening of the initiate. A chief distinction between the states of sleep and wakefulness is that in sleep our will does not function, while it does when we are awake. And since most people are for the most part unable to successfully use their will, we are justified in concluding that they are not fully awake during their waking state. A waking trance induction method is therefore introduced at this stage. It is based on a special way of breathing that is characterized by the decrease of the rate of breathing and the increase of the volume of air breathed in. This method of breathing, which is called Dumo or Gatumo, fire breathing, leads to a state of wakefulness that is many times more intense than normal. The waking trance, opposite to mediumistic or hypnotic, is the subject of one of the greatest books ever to come out of Kemet. Known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a name given it by Arab grave robbers because they found copies of the book buried with the corpses, it is really the Pert M Heru, Book of Becoming Awake. Pert M means becoming and Heru means day or sun, and by extension the day consciousness or wakefulness. In this state of trance, the senses are fully asleep. There is little to no awareness of the external world or the body, while the person is in a state of full mental wakefulness. The wakefulness enables the mediator to see the falsehoods and contradictions in the beliefs that were cultivated in the early part of life. Related to the initiation at this stage is the beginning of a spiritual responsibility that serves as the determinant of the effectuation of spiritual growth. In other words, when do we know that the living of truth has led to spiritual growth? Can you say that growth takes place when the observance of a virtue does not involve a challenge? While exercising at a heart rate of 140 beats per minute signals improvement for someone whose peak exercising rate was lower, it does not for someone already there or beyond. Similarly, spiritual growth only takes place when we are challenged to embrace a truth or directive of the oracle, the wisdom part of our spirit, and it runs into opposition from our conditioning. Your mind is set on doing something, and the oracle or spiritual law reveals to you that you will achieve your goal at the expense of someone else. Doing the right thing will, from the narrow view, cause you losses. These types of scenarios, which are called crossroad situations, have given rise to the belief that the best place to make offerings and do rituals are at crossroads. Success in the living of truth at such crucial moments is made possible by the Heru, or sexual power that is generated in the gonads, house of Het, of sex, or Heru, and a great meditation system entitled Men Ab En Anka and Mat. We will detail it in future chapters. In conclusion, it must be noted that the opposition to the living of truth by our conditionings demands that we summon extra spiritual power. Spiritual power, Kundalini, Ra, can only be aroused to its greatest heights by the genuine challenges in life. Thus, it takes power to get power. It is hoped that the reader will begin to understand that discipline cannot be achieved by meditating on the abstraction discipline. All sermons to such effects or hypnotic autosuggestions like I am disciplined, etc. must fail. Level 2, Stage 5 of initiation, the Ob division of the spirit, the fifth sphere, Herokuti. Herokuti is the dispenser of divine justice. It is the faculty that protects us from our enemies. It is the spiritual mechanism behind our physical and spiritual immunity, and our ability to overcome the resistances of the physical environment. In the same manner that our physical immunity cannot protect us if we violate the laws of our body, eat incorrectly, indulge in excesses, etc., this part of our spirit cannot protect us from the injustices of others and from psychic invasion if we violate its law. In conformity with the law that you reap what you sow, the initiate at this stage meditates on being just with others and makes a commitment to confess to his peers and kin, not enemies, any injustice that has been done to another. The spiritual strength that must be raised to carry this out awakens this faculty to its role of providing psychic protection. If only the major political and religious leaders of nations were to know the reality behind the word justice. Can you see how much the knowledge of the definition, but not the reality itself, is costing us? Can you imagine what would happen to an oppressor if all the individuals in a nation of oppressed people got together and made a commitment to give justice to everyone, as well as a commitment to confess all transgressions against each other? Did the thought heat you up? If it did, congratulations. You have just verified for yourself the basis of the Ra ritual system of Kemet and the Kundalini Yoga of the Dravidians. But where would one find the strength to live up to the demands of this sphere? We must once more draw upon the fact that ourself, the indwelling intelligence at the center of our being, is not swayed by emotions. The ability to carry out the demands of this sphere is merely a natural outgrowth of identifying with Asar. What about the fear, the pashad that Jewish Kabbalism attaches to this sphere, that one must surely suffer in this situation? Once more again, we must realize that identification with the Sar, Kether, involves the realization that the spirit is essentially unconditioned. That is to say that we are free to revert to the original state of our spirit in which there are no predetermined inclinations or response patterns. Level 2, Stage 6 of initiation, the Ab division of the spirit, Sphere 4, Mat. In an earlier chapter, we saw that as the functional needs of the world are varied, hence the cycles of food, water, oxygen, etc., the existence of different types of beings is required. If any one of them were to evolve from their station and function, the world would cease to function. What would make food if plants were to evolve into animals? How would plants make protein if the nitrogen-fixing bacteria were to evolve into some higher form of life? It is time to rid the world of the interspecies evolutionary theory, whose main function is to serve racist policies. In the same manner that the various cells in our body have been made with different degrees of structural and functional complexity in order to carry out the functions specific to them, so are the various creatures in the world. As much as some people may want to trace their ancestry to cockroaches or apes, the fact is that creatures do not evolve or progress above their appointed function in the cycles that sustain earthly life, unlike obsequious civil servants, to become other types of creatures. When we speak of spiritual evolution, we are referring to the graduated coming into being of the hierarchy of faculties of the individual or the species. Similarly, the human kingdom is made up of different racial temperaments. Each one is to make its contribution to the unfoldment of the divine drama. The lesson that the initiate has to learn here is that while his personality or that of his group might be watery, he must share with and let the fiery type live. This is not to say that one must acquiesce in evil or sleep in bed with the enemy. Fire cannot mix with water, but they must both recognize that the whole, and therefore their selves, cannot exist without each other. For many people, the oppressed especially, this is more difficult to carry out than the initiation demands of the preceding stage. Some people would sooner kill themselves than recognize place in the scheme of things for their enemies and oppressors. Once more again, we see how the genuine living situation demands that the initiate summon a great deal of power in order to carry out the laws of the initiation. In each of the three last initiations, we can see that there is a progressive moving away from an identification with our natal personality and earlier conditioned behavior pattern. We must also appreciate the fact that unlike all other spiritual traditions and scriptures, this tree of life based initiation system lays down a careful, graduated set of challenges. It is at the fourth sphere, stage 6 of initiation, that the initiate is asked to turn the other cheek. Christianity and many spiritual traditions do violence to people by making spiritual demands that have not been properly prepared for. Once you analyze the matter, you will see that the various virtues require different levels of intellectual abilities and spiritual power. The planetary correspondence of the fourth sphere, Mat, is Jupiter, which astrologers tell us is the major fortune, or major success. It comes not simply from the act of sharing, giving and therefore receiving, but from the spiritual power generated by the ability to forgive and to work with one's enemies. The sign that this power is fully developed is given evidence by the initiate's ability to maintain a sense of joy and optimism in the face of opposition, even when facing death. Woe unto him who fails to realize that this is the greatest occult secret for generating the spiritual power to achieve earthly objectives. Level 3, Stage 7 of initiation, the Shechem division of the spirit. Sphere 3, Seker. This is the first of 3 initiation stages that involve a total break with worldly interest. We must never lose sight of the fact that such an attitude to life, with proper understanding, and life force generation rituals serve to increase the spiritual power to its highest levels of manifestation. This individual has already gone through initiations that have revealed the fact that psychic power increases in direct relationship to the individual's living of truth in genuine life situations, at the crossroads, and not from the mere performance of spiritual exercises, meditation, rituals, etc. As this sphere is the center of the 50 sound units of power that are the basis of all physical manifestations, we must realize that they cannot be utilized for purposes that are predominantly personal. During the fourth stage of initiation, Sphere 6, it was said that the objectives in man's life are indicated by the oracular, second sphere faculty. One of the results of the practice of consulting oracles is the unification of our undertakings with the divine historical plan. When we get a reading indicating, for example, that the success of our marriage depends on the development of our spiritual faculty represented by the deity Sebek, success in the undertaking goes beyond the marriage itself. In the same way that the normal Sebek talents, communications, skills, etc., are now available for other areas of life, so are the psychic powers of the deity developed in the course of the ritual. The difference is that we must use these powers for the benefit of the world. The ecstasy that must be cultivated at this sphere is not for the mundane objective, but for manifesting the personalities of the deities and their powers in our life for the benefit of the world. For this to be, we must quote-unquote die to the personal mundane goals. The world must cease to hold wonders and pleasures for us. Our pleasure is in manifesting the likeness of God in whose image we have been made. When it is said that Seeker is the God of the dead, a double sense is intended. The dead are both the deceased and the initiates who have died to the interests and pleasures of the world. This is easy to understand when we keep in mind that the initiate is here trading off earthly pleasures for divine power. Level 3, Stage 8 of initiation, the Ku division of the spirit, Sphere 2, Tehuti. Earlier it was said that man's will must be directed by God. Up to this point, this was achieved through the use of oracles, which are means of communicating with the spiritual faculty of the second sphere. Tehuti. In this stage of the initiation, the person learns how to still the thinking mechanism in order to allow this faculty to manifest its omniscience. One of the most important accomplishments resulting from this initiation is the ability to intuit what divine intelligences, deities, are responsible for the various events in the world. This is the kernel of the true meaning of wisdom. In other words, the initiate becomes a sage, i.e., a living oracle. These are the individuals that authored the great oracles that are now in the world. Level 3, Stage 9 of Initiation, the Ba division of the Spirit. Sphere 1, Asar. Here, the initiate experiences that herself is the one and only self dwelling in all things in and as the world. Thus all oppositions are transcended and unity with all creatures is achieved. The initiate becomes an Asar. The greatest challenge for the initiate here is to refrain from taking sides in the seeming conflicts of life. All adversities exist for the sake of making demands upon the individual to reach into the depths of his spirit to awaken the spiritual power to overcome them. One cannot push or exert force if there is no opposition. There can be no manifestation of spiritual power without adversity. All is peace. Hotep. Level 4, Stage 10 of Initiation, Body and Spirit Transcended. Amen. Nu. Here it is finally realized that all that has been transcended was made possible by the fact that the energy or matter that makes up our spirit is essentially unconditioned and unformed. Otherwise, the transcendence could not have taken place. This is the realization of sunyata, or the void of Buddhism. It is Amen, the eminent aspect of God in the Khemetic tradition. Ritualistically, the initiate becomes established in the ability to still all thought activity and raise consciousness beyond the spirit. Even remember that the Ba, the spiritual vehicle of the first sphere, is the highest manifestation of man's spirit. Now that man's consciousness is in the subjective realm and there are no things to occupy consciousness, the self can only be conscious of being conscious. It becomes aware that it is an immaterial reality. In the Khemetic tradition, this is symbolized as the God Amen. The Jewish Kabbalah calls it Ayin, the negative existence. End of Chapter 11, the 10 Stages of Initiation. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Metu Neter, Volume 1, by Ra-Un Amen Nefer. Chapter 12, Meditation and Ritual, the Means of Realizing Spiritual Growth, the Principles of Meditation. In chapters 9 and 10, we learn that the goal of initiation is the liberation of the self by raising consciousness from below the faculty of the sixth sphere, ab division of the spirit, to the highest part of being, the development and right use of the personal will, and the raising of the spiritual force to the level of being able to affect physical phenomena. Meditation is a catchword for the set of practices to the realization of these ends. The fundamental components of man's being. In the past 2 chapters, we saw that spiritual development aims at allowing the indwelling intelligence that directs our involuntary mental and physiological functions to extend its sphere of operation to the social events in our lives, career, marriage, education, performances, etc. The benefits to our lives can be appreciated when we consider the omniscience that the indwelling intelligence shows that it possesses in its handling of the infinite complexity of our physiological processes. What then can we expect from its handling of the affairs of our lives, which are simpler? The comprehension of the processes of meditation and ritual as means of extending the operation of the indwelling intelligence to the external part of our lives depends on a clear understanding of the fundamental components of man's being. 1. We are all aware of the fact that the major part of our physiological and mental processes occur independently of our will. This automaton or spirit or life force, which has been mislabeled the subconscious mind, provides the matrices or molds or programs that guide the physical functions of our bodies and events in the world. It is important to realize that this principle is not conscious, nor does it initiate or program its activities. Its direction and programming are the property of the indwelling intelligence. Health, success, and happiness are the results of the direction of the life force by the true self, which bases its functions on divine law. Unfortunately, the spirit is also receptive to man's will, which is, as we know, nowhere as wise or capable as the indwelling intelligence. It is also receptive to the ideas we assimilate and to the impressions streaming in from our bloodstream and the external environment. Colors, odors, shapes, electromagnetic currents, etc. As the influence that these agents exert upon the spirit are not ordered by laws, as it is with the indwelling intelligence, their influences, if unchecked, create illness, unhappiness, and failure. 2. The second major component of our being is the inner intelligence and source of consciousness. It is Asar, the first sphere, our self, which from here on will at times be referred to as our true self, although redundant. 3. The third major component of our being is the outer intelligence and focal point of externalized consciousness. It is Heru, the sixth sphere, our will, that is in charge of our voluntary mental and physical actions. It is the external point where consciousness grasps or perceives and manipulates objective reality. 4. The fourth major component of our being is the faculty that houses the spiritual matrices that govern the conception of the events of the physical body and environment. This is Auset, the ninth sphere. This is one of the reasons why she is called the mother of all living things. Stages in the process of meditation. We have seen that in the self, the indwelling intelligence is unobstructed. It will maintain the physical organism in good health and extend its functions to running the social aspects of our lives as well. The first source of interference to it comes from the failure to regulate the emotional and sensual activities of the animal part of the spirit. The second source of interference originates from our will when it is directed by our earthly education as opposed to our inner intelligence. These interferences, which cause physical and social disharmony, are symbolized in the Osirian metaphorian as the usurpation of the kingdom by Set and the stalemate or failure of Heru's battle with Set, respectively. The essence of meditation and ritual, then, lies in the harmonization of the will with the inner intelligence. This is symbolized as Asar and Auset giving birth to Heru, and the latter directed to victory by Tehuti, the mouthpiece of Asar. The function of the will, therefore, is to check the influences of the lower parts of the spirit, to enable the self to direct the spirit according to the cosmonical or divine law and order, Tehuti Mat. The process of meditation. Thus far, we have been speaking of an indwelling intelligence that is in charge of directing all of the involuntary mental and physiological functions. We have been saying that it is our true self, and you may have been wondering quite correctly why then you have not been able to sense or to feel or to be conscious in some form of the existence of this intelligence. The answer is a simple one. Consciousness resembles a stream of light in that it has a source of origin, a path of propagation, and a point where it makes contact and grasps the outer objects of perception. In our habitual mode of consciousness, whether we are dreaming or awake, our consciousness is mostly focused at the point of contact with the objects of perception. You will recall, however, that there are times when, as a result of being so absorbed in your thoughts, you find that your awareness of yourself, your surroundings, and your thoughts are just returning to you from a moment in which you are at a loss for what you were thinking about. Some people call this being spaced out or absent-minded. What is really taking place? At such moments, the focal point of consciousness has been withdrawn from the external point where it grasps objects, thoughts, feelings, the external environment, and it has been returned to its source within our being. Because of the immateriality of the self and the manner in which the consciousness was withdrawn to it during such spontaneous occurrences, it is not possible to experience the indwelling intelligence. The result is that we are only conscious of forms that consciousness perceives, our thoughts, feelings which we sum up as our persons, the environment, etc., and not of the source of consciousness, that which is consciousness itself. The ultimate and highest aim of meditation is, therefore, the withdrawal of the focus of consciousness from the objects of perception, the goal of consciousness, and its return to its source. When this is realized, we have no consciousness of objects, our thoughts, feelings, body, and the environment. Freed from objects of consciousness, we are conscious only of being conscious. It is then that we are able to sense, feel, or experience our inner true self. We will have much to say about this. We must first examine all of the possible manners in which consciousness can be altered. The normal waking state is characterized by the tendency of the will to impose itself over the mental functions and its command over the voluntary physical functions. In this state, the will is primarily engaged in determining what ideas should be associated according to the sense of logic and reference to the person's belief system, and what actions are to be allowed in the person's life. The normal dreaming state is characterized by the dormancy of the will, which gives the spirit full control over the body and thought associations. The spirit's activities are, of course, determined by its programs, the condition of the blood, environmental influences, etc. In both states, the normal waking and dreaming, the focus of consciousness is located in the external or lower part of being. A very important characteristic that they both share is their distractibility, or the shortness of the concentration span. The inability to keep the attention on one object or train of thought for very long during normal waking and dreaming is very well known. Mediumistic or hypnotic dream trance, a state of meditation, is very much like the normal dream state, with the fundamental difference that consciousness is fully undistracted. It becomes totally focused on an object or stream of thoughts. This hyper-concentrated state of the focus of consciousness is the key to impressing upon the spirit the programs that will determine its activities. For example, a thought to heal ourselves, expressed in the normal waking or dream states, will fail simply because it was not held long enough in the sphere of awareness. In the mediumistic trance, it can be held long enough to be strongly impressed upon the spirit. There are, of course, other variables to this procedure, which will be considered in the later chapters on meditation. As the will is dormant, the contents of the awareness and the behavior of the person are directed by the spirit's program or by whatever else is influencing its activities: environmental forces, the will of the initiator, the hypnotist, contents of the blood, etc. The full concentration of the focus of consciousness on a personality archetype, a deity, or a fragment of a personality, a spirit, demon, etc., is known as possession, as the behavior of a person takes on the full characteristics of the elements of the personality in question. Because the spirit and not the will is directing the person's voluntary physical vehicle during this state, possessed individuals experience either a diminution or enhancement of their physical capabilities. Its full concentration on an idea, e.g. a virtue, which in turn directs its activities, is called an obsession. This form of at-one-ment of our focus of consciousness with objects of perception is called in the yogic system sampranata. Samadhi equals full concentration. Samprajanata equals object of consciousness. Although it is very powerful and useful, it does not confer wisdom and self-knowledge, and when not directed by a wise teacher, it can lead to deep spiritual bondage. In fact, it is the mechanism that binds us, as the one self, to one of the 7 personality types. Although we are all the same one self, We are each born in Samprajñata Samadhi, possessed by one of the 7 personality types modified by individuated physical circumstances. The waking trance is a state of inner hyper-wakefulness, and it exhibits 2 modalities. The first of these is similar to the normal waking state, with the differences that its degree of wakefulness is greater. It is confined to the mental sphere. The mediator's physical body is partially or fully asleep, and the focus of consciousness is fully concentrated on its objective. In the second of these modalities, the focus of consciousness is withdrawn from the objects of consciousness and returned to the source of consciousness, the indwelling intelligence. Here, the self, which is immaterial, beholds itself. Consciousness grasps consciousness. The yogic tradition calls it a samprajñata samadhi, at one moment of the focus of consciousness, samadhi, without objects in the sphere of awareness. In his Yoga Sutras, Patanjali defines yoga as follows. Yoga, or union, is attained from the inhibition of the mental energy matter. Then the seer is closed in his essential nature. The things that are united, yoked, a question that has plagued yogis for the longest, are the focus of consciousness and the source of consciousness. The inhibition of the mental energy matter is attained by the deactivation of the will, ignoring of thoughts, letting them come and go without expressing interest in them or directing them. When this happens during the hyper-wakeful state of waking trance, there comes a point where the sphere of awareness becomes free of thoughts, allowing the consciousness to sense that which is conscious. When this happens during the normal waking or dream states, it leads to the non-REM state, or rapid eye movement. This is why we do not achieve consciousness of self when we space out or enter into non-REM during sleep. It must be clear to the reader that our dreaming and non-REM experience are not confined to sleeping. In fact, the thought drift activity that we experience during the waking state is in reality a different degree of the dream activity during sleep. The key, therefore, to attaining to the point of experiencing or feeling ourself as the indwelling intelligence, as that which is conscious, depends on the full awakening of ourselves, and the inhibition of the will's function of grasping and directing thoughts. This is the theme, incidentally, of the oldest religious text in the world, the Pert M. Heru, coming forth by day, awakened, which is known incorrectly as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. This latter name originated from the Arab grave robbers who first discovered copies of it buried with the deceased. The components of a meditation. Since the essential objectives of meditation, the raising of consciousness and the supporting of the will, depend on the raising of spiritual power, there are certain health principles that must be observed before undertaking a course of meditation. These aim at the life force, Ra or Kundalini, purifying its channels, equilibrating its modalities, nourishing it, and optimizing the body's ability to relax. Tension impedes meditation by blocking the flow of the Ra, or life force. These involve special dietary observances, yogic exercises, breathing practices, living in harmony with the cycles of the body, etc. The principle involved is no different from the preparation for an athletic contest. The first set of meditations, ninth sphere, involves going into a mediumistic trance, with the objective of identifying with Asar, for it is only through this action that we can lay the foundation for transcending our conditionings. We have already seen the importance of this procedure. The second set of meditations, eighth sphere, involves going into mediumistic trance with the beliefs that are to replace those incorrect beliefs that may block the way to achieving our goal. It is here that we open the way to allow the indwelling intelligence to extend its functions beyond the internal mental and physiological functions to the social aspects of our lives. The third set of meditations, seventh sphere, involves going into mediumistic trance with the image of our person as the deity governing the situation, achieving and enjoying the goal that we are seeking. The fourth set of meditations, sphere number 6, aims at going into waking trance in order to oppose the conditionings that are opposed to the goal that we are seeking to achieve. We may find it necessary to repeat the first set of meditations once more again. The reason for this will be given later. The fifth set of meditations, fifth sphere, aims at going into waking trance to protect one's goal from outside obstructions. This is achieved by making a commitment to achieving one's goal without transgressions against others, or by being willing to face the consequences amongst our peers if this has been done. The sixth set of meditations, fourth sphere, aims at going into waking trance with the commitments to share the fruits of our accomplishments with others, regardless of our differences from them, and to maintain optimism in the face of setbacks and difficulties. It is here that the mundane goal is achieved. As it is said, it was done in 6 days, and on the 7th he rested. But in reality, it is not time to rest. During the first set of meditations, we invoke the spiritual powers for the sake of our mundane objectives. It is now time to realize that the demands of earthly life exist for the sake of forcing man to develop his spiritual powers. The seventh set of meditations, Sphere 3, aims at developing our spiritual power to the highest level that we are capable. The eighth set of meditations, second sphere, aims at intuiting the true significance of the mundane objective that we achieved at the sixth stage. The ninth set of meditations, first sphere, aims at fusing the realizations of the past meditations into the realization of ourself as Asar. The 10th set of meditations, zero above the tree, aims at realizing that the success of the meditations, fundamentally involving manipulations of our spirit, is due to the fact that our spirit is essentially unconditioned. These 10 components of a meditation are the substance of the traditional Kabbalistical statement to the effect that all 10 spheres or deities must contribute to all our undertakings in order for them to be of spiritual significance to us. The importance of trance. We have seen that trance is an essential component of spiritual transcendence. The possession of the ability to go into trance at will and to function in this state is a skill that all people must possess. Many people are now experimenting with so-called techniques of accelerated learning, which when understood are all based on the induction of a mild state of trance. They have discovered that by studying in a mild state of trance, learning can be sped up 2 to 50 times. The political, economic, and military significance of this has not been lost to many nations that are secretly funding the development of these educational techniques. Imagine turning out a 20-year-old PhD in the most advanced concepts of nuclear physics, who at 30 would have the education and experience of a 60-year-old. Incidentally, it was through the use of such super or accelerated learning techniques and more that enabled the ancient black nations to forge in civilization way ahead of the Western and Eastern nations. The studious reader would have noticed that the segregative functions of the left side of the brain correspond to spheres 2, 5, and 8, while the integrative functions of the right side of the brain correspond to spheres 3, 4, and 7. Sphere 9 unifies 7 and 8, and 6 unifies 4 and 5, and 1 unifies 2 and 3. The sixth sphere also unifies all spheres of the tree. Of greatest importance to us at this point is the fact that while the left hemisphere of the brain is more concerned with the extroversion of consciousness, the right hemisphere is the introverter. Meditation, which is a process of introversion, relies heavily then on things that stimulate the right hemisphere to greater activity and deactivate the left hemisphere. This is achieved by concentrating on images and sensations, which are possessed by the right side of the brain while engaging the left side with the chanting of words of power. Since the left side of the brain deals with verbal thinking, it can be deactivated by engaging it with words of power. Because the latter lack meaning, they are power holders and not message holders. Repeating the word prevents the process of verbal thinking, which depends on the stringing together of different words. In addition to this, the word of power contributes to the realization of the meditation objective. The failure to understand this principle has been the cause for one of the greatest stigmas placed upon black people for thousands of years. The use of images in thinking and meditating in order to exalt the functions of the right side of the brain and thus introvert consciousness to bring about trance is the basis of the religious use of idols and hieroglyphs. It is the reason Kemet, or ancient Egypt, never abandoned the use of hieroglyphs for its religious and literary writings, while all of its civil records, inventories, bills, contracts, etc. were written in phonetic script, hieratic and demotic. The well-known concept that a picture is worth 1,000 words is an allusion to the synthetical power of pictorial symbols. It is because of this that the Khemetic initiates called the hieroglyphic script the Sesh Metu Neter, sacred writing. Its sacredness is due to its use in meditation and ritual. If, for example, I want to heal myself through meditation, instead of going into trance with a thought such as, I am Asar, the power to heal myself, I can chant the Heka of Asar, Aum, while visualizing my person holding a Ua staff, which symbolizes well-being and happiness. The string of meaningful words in the first example stimulates the left side of the brain, which by its very nature fights the internalization of consciousness. In the latter example, the right side of the brain is stimulated, therefore taking consciousness into the deeper recesses of consciousness, wherein reside the shaping forces of our behavior and physiological functions. This special use of the hieroglyphs has escaped all Egyptologists who have treated hieroglyphs in the only way that their limited understanding has allowed them. Westerners who cannot help interpreting the Khemetic hieroglyphic script on the basis of their use of language can do no better than to make the racist claim that it represents a primitive form of writing. The hieroglyphic script is made up of 1. A set of alphabetical symbols representing vowels and consonants, and 2. A set of non-alphabetical symbols that have been all lumped indiscriminately into a class Egyptologists call determinatives. Some indicate that the word represents a deity, others a person, etc. While some of these symbols clearly function in this capacity, many of them are parts of what can be called the Khemetic right side of the brain symbol set. With the use of these symbols, which I have compiled and explained in Appendix A, all ideas that can be put into words for meditation purposes can instead be expressed pictorially, i.e. acted out in the spirit. Not only does this facilitate meditation, it eventually helps to unify the thinking of the initiate by providing him with a wealth of synthetical symbols for the use of his fourth sphere faculty. This esoteric or symbolic function of hieroglyphs is under the dominion of the goddess of wisdom, Seshat, also known as Sefkit, related to the 7 liberal arts, a female aspect of Tahuti. Tyros in Khemetic esotericism would be able to see the connection to magic. End of chapter 12. Please support this channel by clicking on the links below.